A maid working for a wealthy family noticed something peculiar and decided to install cameras in the house. What she discovered left her frozen with shock. Another day began in Anna's monotonous life. A modest middle-aged woman, she had been serving one of the most influential and wealthy families in the city for years. From a young age, Anna had known severe poverty, becoming an orphan early on. She spent part of her childhood in a religious orphanage where she received basic shelter and education in return for doing various chores until she finally became self-reliant. With few opportunities due to her limited education, Anna had taken on all kinds of arduous jobs to make ends meet, washing clothes for others, cooking in diners, and cleaning offices and houses. Until an old employer recommended her for a position in the luxurious mansion of the esteemed Ortega family, who were looking for a reliable maid. The interview and tests she underwent were quite rigorous, scrutinizing the tiniest details of her past before offering her the job. But after that exhaustive background check, Anna finally secured the coveted position. From that moment, her life improved considerably, although her status remained very modest and inferior compared to the always demanding Ortega family. They assigned her a small service room next to the kitchen and laundry room where she could sleep without having to pay rent. Though the cleaning and maintenance work was grueling from dawn to dusk, for the first time in her life, Anna had a fixed salary and a roof over her head, ensuring at least some stability. On this particular day, Anna hurried more than usual, as her boss demanded breakfast to be ready and the family awake before 7 a.m., because Mr. Ortega had to leave for a very important meeting at the headquarters of his shipping company. No one in their right mind would dare to slightly defy the strict orders of the always intimidating Diego Ortega. At 58, Mr. Ortega had inherited a thriving maritime business from his father, which under his stern command had expanded to entire fleets of ships and warehouses, not only in the country but also abroad. Today he would sign a lucrative contract to establish new trade routes with Asian partners, which would further increase his already enormous fortune. Anna had always felt uneasy and even a bit afraid of this tall man with eyes as cold as steel, who rarely exchanged words with her beyond a dry good morning or an occasional order. Every morning, without fail, she meticulously checked every corner to ensure the floors shone and every piece of furniture was perfectly cleaned before serving the abundant breakfast to her employers. While carefully cleaning the large window of the living room facing the street, Anna glanced for a moment towards the spacious dining room where the entire Ortega family was already gathered, once again in a dense silence only interrupted by the light clinking of fine porcelain. At the head of the table was the always stern Mr. Diego, clean-shaven and dressed in one of his elegant tailored suits, reading the stock quotes of the day while sipping his coffee. Beside him, Mrs. Laura barely touched her breakfast, elegantly spreading raspberry jam on her toast. At 50, Mrs. Ortega maintained a slender and youthful figure, enhanced by wearing fine designer clothes and jewelry that denoted the family's enormous wealth. As a typical high society wife, Laura spent most of her days organizing charity events and playing poker and bridge with her friends, always aiming to appear in the social chronicles as the perfect lady of the house fulfilling her decorative role. Finally, at the other end of the large table was the family's only son, Alejandro. The 14-year-old would one day inherit the entire maritime empire, so he was being raised almost forcefully by his father in business, being made to attend meetings and familiarize himself with the company's matters from a very young age. Anna had always noticed how different Alejandro was from both his father and his mother. He hardly spoke during meals, keeping his head down most of the time, only timidly raising his eyes from his plate when his father addressed him with a question or comment about the business. She also noticed how extremely pale and haggard he looked lately, as if something were worrying him or he were falling ill. But Anna knew it wasn't her place to meddle in her employer's family matters. That day, Alejandro looked even more gaunt than usual, barely touching his food with a rather disheveled appearance, as if he had seen a ghost. Suddenly, his eyes met Anna's for a fraction of a second, and she felt a terrible chill. The boy's gaze was one of such deep anguish and desperation that she almost dropped the window cleaner she was holding. At that moment, Mr. Ortega stood up so abruptly that his chair almost fell backward, startling everyone. "Well, there's no more time to lose. Alejandro, You'll stay studying the reports I left on your desk last night. I expect you to have thoroughly analyzed the projections for the acquisitions in Singapore when I return. Have a good day, my dear, he said coldly to his wife, then planted a dry kiss on her forehead almost without looking at her. After grabbing his briefcase and car keys, without even waiting for a response, the imposing businessman walked firmly through the hallway towards the underground garage to head to his company as he did every morning. The brief and uncomfortable moment was interrupted by the sound of Alejandro's phone vibrating noisily on the table under his mother's reproachful gaze. The young man took it nervously and excused himself, quickly retreating to his room, leaving his breakfast almost untouched. Laura sighed resignedly and also stood up, not without first swatting away a fly that hovered around the remains of jam on her plate with the tablecloth. She hated those insects. She called Anna with a slight gesture of her jeweled hand to give her instructions for the day with her characteristic curt and weary tone. Anna, I need you to vacuum all the carpets and wash the curtains in the main hall. With the heat, they get filled with disgusting mosquitoes. Oh, and don't forget to water the plants in the back garden. The gardener only comes twice a week and that scorching sun burns them. I'll be in my room handling some matters by phone. Please prepare a fresh salad for lunch. With this heat, I don't want anything heavy. Having delivered her brief monologue, Mrs. Ortega left the dining room for her quarters without even waiting for a response from the maid. Anna was more than accustomed to these curt and impersonal manners. That had been the way throughout all the years she had served in the mansion. Without further ado, she diligently set out to fulfill her mistress's tasks with energy and meticulousness. If there was one thing that characterized Anna, it was her extreme dedication and responsibility in her duties, no matter how tedious or repetitive they might become after so much time. Her work was her greatest pride. Once she had finished the thorough cleaning of the main hall, including the carpets, she hurried to the back patio to water the plants as requested. She always strove to be efficient to avoid any kind of reprimand, very aware of how lucky she was to have stable employment and housing at her age. She couldn't afford to risk that hard-earned privilege. As she sprayed abundant fresh water over the rose leaves using a pretty tin watering can she liked so much, Anna suddenly noticed out of the corner of her eye that the back door of the kitchen leading to the patio was inexplicably ajar. She was completely sure she hadn't left it like that when she went out moments before. In fact, she distinctly remembered hearing the typical metallic click of the lock as it closed as it did every morning. Puzzled by this unusual occurrence, she approached cautiously, holding the watering can as a weapon in case there was an intruder on the property. She knew she had to be extremely careful. Could it be a thief? Impossible. The mansion had state-of-the-art security systems. With her heart nearly pounding out of her chest, Anna fully opened the heavy door, which creaked slightly on its hinges. She held her breath, anticipating the worst. But to her great surprise, when she quickly glanced inside, she saw absolutely no one. The utensils and pots were hanging intact on the wall in their usual place. There was no sign that anyone had rummaged through the drawers or the pantry. Everything seemed normal. After thoroughly checking every corner without finding anything out of the ordinary that would explain the mysteriously opened door, Anna resecured it, feeling somewhat confused. Perhaps, she thought, the breeze had gently pushed the door open. Or maybe she was simply so fatigued from the endless list of tasks that her memory was playing tricks on her. In any case, she tried to dismiss it and focused on finishing the rest of her chores. After completing the most demanding cleaning tasks and preparing the light lunch for her employer as instructed, Anna headed to the laundry room to continue the maintenance cycle of the elegant living room curtains. It was a rather tedious task, but one she couldn't postpone much longer. As she carefully placed the long, ivory silk fabric into the large soaking tub and began pouring the necessary neutral detergent, her eyes suddenly noticed something that made her hold her breath. There, in one of the corners of the large sink, were some tiny spots that looked like blood. Astonished, she closely examined the fabric, trying to find a rational explanation. Those almost imperceptible crimson specks stood out vividly against the soft ivory background. Where could they have come from? She gently ran her fingers over the spots, which also turned a deep red. It was definitely blood. But whose? And how did it get there? She immediately dismissed the possibility that it was her own blood. She clearly remembered not having injured herself in recent days. It also seemed unlikely that a visitor or family member had been injured in the main living room to explain these strange stains on the curtains. So, where on earth had the blood come from? And what was it doing there, as if someone had tried to hide it among the folds of the fabric? A deep chill ran down her spine as the growing confusion and alarming sensation that something very strange was happening in this house without her knowledge. Suddenly, she remembered the enigmatic look of deep terror and pain in Alejandro's eyes during breakfast. She also recalled the incident with the slightly open door hours earlier near the same laundry room. Her pulse quickened, sensing something sinister lurking behind the seemingly innocuous and opulent facade where she had worked for years. At that moment, some sudden approaching footsteps startled her just as she was about to photograph the disturbing stains as proof that she wasn't imagining things. She quickly dropped the curtain back into the sink and resumed her task, whistling nonchalantly when the housekeeper appeared looking for some clean sheets. After the stout woman left with the pile of white sheets in her arms, Anna hesitated for a moment about whether to tell her about her discovery, but decided against it. There was no sense in worrying others over something that could well be a mistake on her part. She decided to wait before drawing any hasty conclusions. But deep down, she knew she had to stay alert. Too many unusual things had happened in that house that day, and her instinct told her something very suspicious was hidden behind the impeccable facade of the Ortega family. That night, she struggled to fall asleep in her small service room, tormented by possible explanations for what had happened that morning. She considered informing Mr. or Mrs. Ortega. Or perhaps going straight to the police. No, she had no proof and they might think she was crazy. And if she was simply imagining everything due to fatigue or stress, it didn't make sense to worry her employers without solid reasons. But her heart told her there was something very wrong. If only she could confirm that her suspicions were real and not just paranoia, she would feel much more at ease the next morning. Anna woke up after a long night of restless and interrupted sleep, still burdened by the strange incidents of the previous day, replaying over and over in her mind. But she tried to momentarily set aside those worries and began her routine with renewed energy. After dressing quickly and tidying up her small room for the next few hours, she diligently headed to the kitchen to prepare the lavish breakfast for her employers, as she did every morning. On the way, she almost bumped into Alejandro, who also seemed to have had a terrible night, given how haggard he looked, with dark circles under his eyes. "Good morning, Alejandro," she greeted him kindly, but the boy didn't respond, continuing on his way with his head down and dragging his feet. Anna couldn't help but notice he was wearing the same clothes as the previous day, as if he hadn't even gone to bed all night. Once in the kitchen, while frying some bacon and making freshly squeezed orange juice, her thoughts returned to solving the mystery of those strange stains. She needed to confirm as soon as possible whether they were real or just a product of her imagination. An idea began to form in her mind as she served breakfast at the table. She would take advantage of having to return to the laundry room for the drying cycle of those curtains to examine them closely once more and settle her doubts once and for all. Minutes later, when the employers left the table to head to their respective obligations under Anna's watchful eye, she hurriedly went back to the laundry room. With her heart racing, she opened the dryer before the cycle finished to anxiously pull out the long silk curtains. She spread them out on a table, examining them inch by inch for the red stains. And there they were, so clear and evident that she felt a terrible chill run through her body, making the hairs on her neck stand up. They weren't her imagination. Someone had tried to remove that bloodstain, but some drops had impregnated the fabric. She had to get to the bottom of this mystery as soon as possible. Determined to find clues that would allow her to elucidate where the suspicious substance had come from, she took some drops with a swab, soaking it well and then storing it in a transparent bag she always carried in her apron, in case she needed to collect samples. She discreetly labeled it as textile substance N1 and hid it among her belongings for later analysis. With her heart still racing, she resumed her usual work, vigorously scrubbing the stain to remove any trace from the curtain. She had to do it before anyone else saw it, or her job would be in grave danger. If they discovered her snooping into matters that didn't concern her, they could even accuse her of theft. She had to be extremely careful from now on, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery no matter what. In the following days, Anna continued with her usual work, but observing every little detail around her like a hawk, as anything out of place could constitute a new clue about what was happening in that house. But she detected nothing relevant in the first few days beyond the usual aloofness and cold relationships among the Ortega family. Alejandro still looked sickly and barely ate during meals, lost in his own world. Both the family members and the rest of the staff showed no signs of being worried or alert to anything strange happening under their noses. It wasn't until the 5th day of intense covert surveillance that Anna experienced the second disturbing incident. While sweeping some dry leaves on the back terrace, she heard a faint, almost imperceptible moan coming from the backyard, specifically from the property. Trying to find the source of the sound, to her surprise, the moan repeated, this time a bit louder but still weak and muffled. It was clearly coming from the dilapidated structure currently used by the gardener as a storage for his tools and bags of soil or fertilizer. What or who could be making those sounds? Anna began to fear the worst. Gathering her courage and feeling the ground, she whispered in a slightly trembling voice, "Is anyone there? Please, answer me. Don't be afraid, I'm here to help." Only silence responded. After a few tense seconds that felt like an eternity, waiting expectantly for any sign of life, she began to circle the shed, looking for a way to peer inside. It was then that she noticed a small side window almost concealed by the undergrowth. She had to stand on tiptoe to look in. She first timidly peeked one eye, trying to adjust her vision to the darkness. When she could make out what was on the dirty floor, she couldn't stifle a gasp of horror, quickly covering her mouth with both hands. There, curled up in a ball, lay a small figure she instantly recognized. It was Alejandro. Anna had to summon all her determination not to run away in panic and seek help. She forced herself to look again to make sure it wasn't an illusion. But there was no doubt that blonde, somewhat tangled hair and clothing were unmistakable. Young Ortega was clearly in trouble, tied up hand and foot, gagged, and barely making muffled sounds of suffering. But what the hell was going on there? Without thinking twice, she circled the small structure, looking for a way to get in and help the boy. Finally, she found a door secured only with a worn padlock, which she managed to force open with the gardener's pliers. Holding her breath, she entered, ready to face any danger to save Alejandro. But to her immense surprise, there was absolutely no one there but the weakened young man, still bound on the cold cement floor with traces of having cried. Perhaps due to panic and pain. Without saying a word, Anna quickly cut the ties binding his hands and feet with scissors, removing the gag from his mouth. My God! Young Alejandro, are you all right? What did they do to you, for heaven's sake? She asked, anguished, while helping him to sit up and trying to get him to respond by patting his cheeks. The stunned boy still seemed to be in shock, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Suddenly his gaze focused on Anna's face, and his eyes filled with tears. He threw himself at her, sobbing uncontrollably, trying to explain. "Oh, Anna, thank you for finding me. I thought I was going to die here. It was them again, my parents. I don't know why they hate me so much." Anna felt anger take over her entire being upon hearing this, but she forced herself to remain calm for the poor boy's sake, who was now releasing all his accumulated suffering onto her. She tried to comfort him as best she could, drying his tears and whispering words of reassurance in his ear during that tight embrace. After letting him cry for several minutes to relieve tension, she helped him to his room, almost dragging him, making sure no one saw them, so he could clean up and change after such a traumatic experience. She served him sweet tea and some cookies, instructing him to stay and rest while she went to get some painkillers for his reddened wrists. The panic and confusion in the young man's eyes were evident. Before quickly leaving for the medication, Anna tried to find out more about what had happened. "Young Alejandro, I know it's very soon, and maybe you don't want to talk about it, but I need to know exactly what happened to help you. Who locked you up and hurt you so cruelly?" Was it your parents, as you said? Please, I am your friend and would never betray you. Tell me the truth. Alejandro shuddered as if he had received a strong electric shock. After a moment of hesitation, he broke down crying again. It was my father. Last night, he caught me trying to sneak out of the house, and as punishment, he locked me up all day without food or water, and he beat me very hard, Anna. I thought he was going to kill me. Please, you have to get me out of here. This is hell. Anna's heart ached at that heartbreaking plea. She stroked his hair maternally, promising she would help him escape no matter what. She kissed his forehead before leaving to get those pills, discreetly wiping away her own tears of helplessness as she walked down the hallway. How could parents be so cruel and heartless to their own child? She had no more doubts. Something truly sinister was happening behind those elegant walls. And she swore she would get to the bottom of it to save the poor boy from the clutches of those heartless monsters before it was too late. This time nothing and no one would change her mind. That night, after making sure Alejandro was sound asleep under the effect of a mild sedative, Anna quietly headed to the seldom visited attic, just above the private wing where the Ortega's quarters were located. According to her watch, it was about 2 a.m, the time when deep sleep overcomes even the most awake. She carefully avoided making any noise that might wake someone, and proceeded to place the small device she had obtained. A tiny spy camera with sound and night vision sensors, which an acquaintance had gotten for her at a modest price. She secured it with adhesive tape in a dark corner behind a beam so it would go unnoticed but still capture the entrance to the master bedroom. She typed a few commands into the portable modem, linking it to the camera to activate the continuous recording function. If something suspicious was happening, she would now capture it with solid evidence. She could monitor the Ortega's movements from a distance thanks to the app on her phone. She was determined to protect Alejandro as if he were her son, no matter the danger to herself. She would show those arrogant rich folks what a humble maid was capable of doing for love. Over the next few days, Anna fervently dedicated herself to her undercover mission, without neglecting any of her usual household chores to avoid arousing suspicion. She continued to impeccably fulfill all her duties, even with her heart and her throat and her mind focused on analyzing the audio-visual material discreetly captured by the hidden attic camera. She spent every free minute she had watching the screen of her phone, mentally noting everything that happened in front of the Ortega's main bedroom. As a precaution, she had also installed an app to directly record the images to the cloud, in case something happened to her phone. During the first 48 hours, the footage was mundane and boring. It only showed brief scenes of the housekeeper cleaning, a maid removing sheets to wash, or Mrs. Laura coming and going elegantly dressed. Probably for her social engagements and card games with friends. Nothing relevant. It was not until the afternoon of the third day that Anna witnessed the first disturbing scene. After Laura returned from having tea with her lady companion and lay down for a while, browsing her phone, her husband suddenly burst in, his face twisted in fury, slamming the door open. "Damn it, Laura. Where the hell did you put the documents I clearly told you to file about the shipyard acquisition? I almost lost a multi-million-dollar deal today in front of the board because of your incompetence," he raged, throwing a nearby floor lamp as he entered. The woman startled up from the bed, evidently accustomed to these angry outbursts. She responded somewhat intimidated, but without losing her composure, pointing towards the dressing room where important papers were kept in a built-in safe. She seemed very familiar with this aggressive behavior. Quickly, she typed some numbers into the digital panel to open the small vault and handed him a slightly yellowed envelope with the logo of some maritime company. Without a word or thanks, the enraged businessman snatched it violently from her hands to glance through it briefly. He held his breath until confirming they were the missing documents, and without another word, stormed out like an enraged beast, muttering insults under his breath but not hitting her, to Anna's relief as she anticipated this outcome. "Damned animal," thought the maid, clenching her fists in impotence. It was obvious that the household staff was so familiar with these incidents of violence that they didn't even flinch at the sounds of shouts and insults. Otherwise, they would have already quit in horror at such indignity. Perhaps out of fear or pity, they didn't report the abuse, but she had no intention of standing by idly. At that moment, Alejandro timidly entered his mother's room, calling her. The boy walked slightly hunched over, with a black eye and a quite emaciated appearance after the terrible beating his father had given him days ago. Seeing him in such a deplorable state broke Anna's heart into 1,000 pieces. The poor thing was just a confused teenager who didn't deserve any of that torment. "Mom, can we talk for a moment?" he asked in a broken voice, hesitantly entering the opulent bedroom. Laura didn't even turn to look at him as she disdainfully replied while touching up her makeup in the large mirror. "Not now, Alejandro, I'm getting ready to go out." "Tell the maid to help you with whatever you need and leave me alone," she replied without a shred of warmth, dismissing him. Anna felt so much rage and helplessness at that moment that she almost threw her phone violently against the wall if not for the fact that it continued recording impassively. How was it possible that this woman didn't rush to comfort and protect her own son, seeing him so defenseless and injured? Instead, she seemed annoyed by his presence as if he were a nuisance. The Ortega family were definitely soulless beasts, and her moral duty was to confront them to save Alejandro from that ordeal. But she needed more solid evidence first. In the following days, the maid gathered more evidence of Don Diego's violent character, like the day he threw a glass of brandy, setting the living room curtains on fire because of an out-of-place comment by the butler. Alejandro and his mother also appeared sporadically on camera, arguing until she slapped him hard, making him run crying inconsolably to his room. Anna boiled with rage at every new outrage she witnessed in those videos, but she held back, thinking about her escape plan for the boy. She had some savings and a distant friend who owed her a big favor. Maybe she could turn to him to hide the boy for a while until she decided what to do. But she couldn't act hastily or they would be discovered. On the 7th day of surveillance, Anna witnessed the most dramatic scene yet. In the early hours of the morning, the attic camera captured movement in the main hallway leading to the master bedroom. To her horror, she saw a very agitated Don Diego practically dragging a terrified Alejandro by the hair while shouting all sorts of insults. The crazed man slammed the door open and then brutally shoved the teenager onto the bed. He then pulled a gleaming hunting knife from his pocket, a sight that would be etched in Anna's mind for the rest of her life. Without saying a word, he pounced on the defenseless boy, aiming the knife straight at his neck. What happened next was so fast that she almost fainted right there. In a matter of seconds, Don Diego immobilized his son, cutting his shirt open mercilessly with the knife while a terrified Alejandro screamed in pain, crying and begging him to stop. But the crazed man was out of control, slashing his chest and arms while growling like a wild animal. Blood flowed abundantly, staining the sheets. Anna was paralyzed with horror at this gruesome scene, reminiscent of a horror movie. Tears fell uncontrollably down her cheeks as she listened to her young friend's screams and pleas. She internally prayed that someone would rescue him from that ordeal, unable to even move due to the tremendous emotional shock. Suddenly, the door burst open and a hysterical Laura stormed into the room upon hearing the heartbreaking screams. Seeing the macabre scene, she screamed crazily for her husband to stop immediately. She even had to wrestle with the crazed man to take the bloody knife from his hands before he ended up killing the boy in that psychotic rage. After one last furious shove that threw his son against a mirror, shattering it, a panting Don Diego calmed down a bit, snorting like an enraged bull. Without saying a word, he only cast a contemptuous glance at Alejandro, who lay curled up, sobbing in a corner, and left, slamming the door while his wife screamed angrily. The poor teenager had his torso, arms, and face bloodied from the cuts, although fortunately, the wounds seemed relatively superficial. Anna turned off the screen when she saw the housekeeper come in to help him. She couldn't continue recording. Trembling from head to toe, she had to sit down before she vomited from the shock of witnessing such an atrocity live. She knew Mr. Ortega was a violent and ruthless man, but she never imagined he would go so far as to try to kill Alejandro, his own son. That night she stayed up, feeling terribly guilty for not having done anything to prevent that savage attack. The images of her young friend covered in blood haunted her mind, causing terrible anguish. She should have intervened somehow. Tomorrow, without fail, she would find a way to get him out of that terrifying house secretly. Early in the morning, she hurried to Alejandro's quarters, pretending to bring a breakfast tray as an excuse to check that he had indeed been treated and to verify his mood. To her relief, the young man was already clean, with his wounds treated and somewhat more recovered after the nightmare he had lived through. They both cried, hugging for a long time, releasing all the accumulated anguish and fear. Alejandro sincerely thanked her for being the only person who truly cared about him. That day, Ana solemnly promised Alejandro that she would get him out of that house no matter what. Her heart ached for the young boy who had suffered so much under the hands of those who should have protected him. With a steely resolve, she began to lay out a plan that would ensure Alejandro's safety and their escape from the clutches of his cruel parents. Over the next few days, Ana worked with a renewed sense of purpose, her mind always focused on the escape plan. She knew she had to be extremely careful. Any slip-up could lead to disastrous consequences for both her and Alejandro. She maintained her usual duties, making sure to not raise any suspicion, but every spare moment she had was spent preparing for their departure. She discreetly contacted her friend, Raul, who had a small farm on the outskirts of the city. Raul was a trustworthy man who had once been in a similar situation, having to flee from an abusive family in his youth. He understood the urgency and agreed to help without hesitation. The plan was simple but dangerous. Ana would get Alejandro out of the house at night, and Raul would be waiting with a car to take them to his farm, where they could hide until they figured out the next steps. The night of the escape finally arrived. Ana felt her heart pounding in her chest as she approached Alejandro's room. She had given him a mild sedative earlier in the evening to help him sleep, but now it was time to wake him and get moving. Gently, she shook him awake, whispering his name. "Alejandro, it's time. We have to go now," she whispered urgently. The boy, still groggy from sleep, nodded and slowly got out of bed. Ana had already packed a small bag with some clothes and essentials. They moved quietly through the dark corridors of the mansion, careful not to make any noise that might alert the other residents or the security staff. The house was eerily silent, the only sound being the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway. As they approached the back door, Ana's heart skipped a beat when she heard a noise behind them. She quickly turned around, but it was only the old grandfather clock chiming the hour. She let out a sigh of relief and continued moving forward, her grip tightening on Alejandro's hand. Finally, they reached the back door. Ana carefully unlocked it and they stepped out into the cool night air. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the garden in shadows, which worked to their advantage. They made their way across the lawn, sticking to the darker areas to avoid being seen by any roaming guards. As they neared the edge of the property, Ana saw Raul's car parked just beyond the gate, its headlights off to avoid drawing attention. Raul was leaning against the car, looking around nervously, but when he saw them approaching, he quickly opened the back door for them. "Get in, quickly," Raul whispered, his voice tense with urgency. Ana and Alejandro climbed into the back seat, and Raul immediately started the car. They drove off, careful to stay within the speed limits to avoid attracting any unnecessary attention. As they left the city behind, Ana finally allowed herself to breathe a little easier, though she knew they were far from being out of danger. After an hour of driving through winding country roads, they finally arrived at Raul's farm. It was a modest place, surrounded by thick woods that provided natural cover. Raul led them into the house, where a small room had been prepared for Alejandro. "You'll be safe here for now," Raul assured them. "But we need to figure out what to do next. We can't stay here too long, they'll eventually come looking." Ana nodded, knowing he was right. They would need to come up with a plan to get Alejandro far away from his parents' reach. She thanked Raul for his help and then sat down with Alejandro, who looked exhausted but relieved to be out of the mansion. "We'll find a way to keep you safe," Ana promised, her voice filled with determination. "No one will ever hurt you again." For the next few days, Ana and Raul worked on securing new identities for Alejandro. Raul had connections with a friend who could create forged documents, giving Alejandro a new name and background. It was risky, but it was their best shot at ensuring his safety. Meanwhile, Ana continued to care for Alejandro, who was slowly beginning to recover from the trauma he had endured. The boy started to open up more, talking about his hopes and dreams for a future free from fear. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Raul's cozy living room, Alejandro looked at Ana with a seriousness that belied his age. "Ana, I don't want to keep running. I want to live a normal life, go to school, make friends, but I don't know if that's possible anymore." Ana's heart broke for him. She reached out and took his hand in hers. "Alejandro, we will find a way. You deserve a chance at happiness, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you get it." The next morning, Raul returned with good news. His contact had managed to create new documents for Alejandro. The boy was now Carlos Sanchez, a distant relative of Raul who had come to live with him after the death of his parents in a car accident. It was a simple story, but it was believable enough to hold up under scrutiny. With the new identity in place, they decided it was time to leave the farm. Raul had a cousin who lived in a small town several hundred miles away, a place where no one knew them and where they could start fresh. It was far from the life Alejandro had known, but it was safe, and that was what mattered most. The day they left the farm was bittersweet. Raul had been a true friend, risking everything to help them, and Ana was deeply grateful. As they drove away, she looked back at the farm one last time, knowing that this chapter of their lives was ending, but hopeful that a better one was beginning. After a long journey, they arrived in the small town where Raul's cousin lived. It was a quiet place, surrounded by rolling hills and far removed from the chaos of the city. Raul's cousin, Maria, welcomed them with open arms, understanding the need for secrecy. She helped them settle into a small, cozy house on the outskirts of town, where Alejandro could finally begin to rebuild his life. As the weeks passed, Alejandro started to adapt to his new identity as Carlos. He enrolled in the local school, where he quickly made friends, and for the first time in his life, he experienced what it was like to live without fear. Ana found work as a housekeeper for a kind family in the town, and though life was still challenging, it was peaceful. One day, as Ana watched Alejandro laughing with his new friends in the schoolyard, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had done what she promised. She had saved him from a life of pain and fear, giving him a chance at a future filled with hope. But even as she felt relief, Ana knew they could never truly let their guard down. The Ortegas were powerful and ruthless, and they would not easily give up on finding their son. But for now, in this small, quiet town, they were safe. And Ana would do whatever it took to keep it that way. As the sun set over the hills, casting a warm glow over the town, Ana and Alejandro sat on the porch of their little house, enjoying the peaceful evening. They didn't know what the future held, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together, as a family.